Christof Mauch, who is director of the Rachel Carson Center for Environment and Society and chair in American Culture and Transatlantic Relations at LMU Munich. He is also affiliated professor in history faculty LMU Munich and honorary professor and fellow of the Center for Ecological History at Renmin University in China. He's one of the leading figures in the field, with over 100 presentations in over 25 countries, specialization in China, US, and Germany. His publications include Slow Hope in AIM in March 2020 and Paradise Blues, Travels Through American Environmental History, which is about to get out. Christopher, thank you so much for being here with us and talk to us and conclude this day, which is not a slim task, with the ghost, both the good and the bad ghost of the future.
Thank you very much, Martin and Maria Gregory, for inviting me. It's wonderful to be here, and I can only reiterate what Salima just said. This is the ideal place. I cannot think of a better place that really reminds us of the past. I mean, we're sitting here on bones, on a graveyard, on an industrial zone. We are close to the sea. Land and water are very close and speaking to each other. And all the papers that we've heard about talk to the importance of understanding that we live in cycles and that we contribute to, we can change the cycles to some extent, but in other respects, we cannot change them because nature is an actor as well. I'm really fascinated and very happy to be here. I was asked to talk about ghosts. I know nothing about ghosts, but I'm intrigued by it. And you can see that I'm an Americanist. This is a photo that I took, and I will tell you that all the places that I'm writing about, well, I'm not writing about the moon, but as long as I'm writing about a place on Earth, I'm actually visiting it. And you will hear about this place in a minute. It's in a desert in America. How do I move this forward? Yeah, okay. I will be very quick because time is short. These are 3 books that it's based on. The middle book will be published in English soon. And so I will ask, what is a ghost first? I will start with a ghost town, continue with Niagara. So this goes back to my book on American environmental history and Disney World. And I will also talk about the Bavarian forest. So the Urwald book is about the Bavarian forest. And I will have some final reflections. What is a ghost? I can read it better here, actually. So ghosts are an echo of the past. And I mean, when I look around here, I think it's so important not to forget the past and to think about the past and the future. We just heard from Salima about how important it is to think back. If you think of clay, you know, clay is, we use 20,000 times more CO2 if we have an industry building with glass and concrete than with adobe. Thinking about the past is important. So ghosts are haunting us to some extent. They come from the past and disappear. And the idea or existence of a ghost is based on the understanding that something that is physically gone can still be with us, have an impact on us, and can haunt us. Ghosts go back, the story of ghosts goes back thousands of years. And certainly the Greeks knew a lot about ghosts. And they knew also that ghosts can be good ghosts. For the Greeks, there were different types of ghosts. For once, there were the people who died too early. For instance, because they died in youth. Also, people who died in war. And they were believed to be the ones who could teach us something. Because they didn't have the time to finish. They didn't have the time to say what they were going to say had they had a chance to live longer. And so they were seen as persons of wisdom. I can't read all this. This is a pity. You can read it probably. So there were sources of wisdom. They provide insight into present crisis and guidance for an unknown future. Ghosts are not zombies. I had to teach myself that. I have to admit that I didn't know. There's a simple difference between ghosts and zombies. Zombies are, well, you probably know this film, this French film, where the people are coming out of the cemetery. Zombies are have a body, whereas ghosts don't have a body, but they're still present. So the difference is that zombies are in the world and off the world, but ghosts, like, and I say the same is true for environmental stories, ghosts are in the world but not off the world, which means they don't have a body, they're not physical. A zombie is physical because it's a revived person, you can actually see them passing through the world. I was also intrigued by the fact that ghosts cannot be known. If we do not know something, we still try to imagine it, and I think that's really fascinating, that we try to imagine monsters, and ghosts were imagined, for instance, like this unspeakable monster. They can be frightening. We can imagine them, but we cannot see them. We cannot know them. And many of our problems today are difficult. The crisis that we're in, the ecological crisis overlaid with the war, overlaid with the pandemic, and the extinction, resource depletion, etc. These are all crises, and they bring a lot of uncertainty for the future. So the question is, can ghosts of the past help us deal with this future? Well, this is one of the great authors, H.P. Lovecraft, who has written ghost stories. I think we can learn something from him. So people in the medieval times who did not know anything about a certain territory, terra incognita, or the ocean, when they didn't know something, they used ghosts or monster to put them on the maps. So if there was something uncertain or unknown, they used ghosts like here. Now this is where I went in my book, for my book Paradise Blues, and we're going to visit 3 of the places very quickly. One of them is St. Thomas, you see it on the left in the west, and Las Vegas, close to it. The other one is Niagara Falls and Love Canal, next to it. And the third one is Disney World and the Everglades. First place, I have to start, when I talk about ghosts, I have to start with the cemetery. There is nothing left of St. Thomas, almost nothing, but there's a cemetery. And this cemetery is not in St. Thomas. We're talking about a desert in Nevada, in the American West. The only color in the whole area, in this desert, are these flowers, and they're artificial flowers, so people, relatives of those who passed away, come to this cemetery. But St. Thomas was actually a thriving city at one point. Just over 100 years ago, it looked like this. You can see the general merchandise. They were selling feed for horses and for other animals. They had vegetables. They were planting vegetables. They were very close to a creek. They were also selling, well, it says supplies for miners, which will remind you that there was a salt mine, and the salt mine was the largest salt mine in the American West, one of the largest salt mines at the time. Here are 2 photos, not many photos left of St. Thomas. After the school building was completed, probably around 1920, it looked like this. Gentry Hotel looked like this. St. Thomas doesn't exist anymore, and the cemetery is somewhere else. What happened? This really relates to what we just heard by Salima. Before St. Thomas, which was a settlement of the Mormons who had no other place to go, they were sent in the desert. Before the Mormons, an indigenous population lived here, and they lived here for hundreds and hundreds of years in extreme temperatures, like with 40 degrees, 50 degrees for many weeks, and they were able to survive. They lived below the ground. You entered the houses through the roof. And now the opposite. What have we done? The neighbor town, basically, of St. Thomas is Las Vegas. What does Las Vegas look like in the beginning of the 20th century? This is what it looked like. There was hardly any water. Why would anybody imagine that something comes out of this place? It didn't have a history. It didn't have a future. This is a photo taken in November 1904. And what does it look like today? It looks like this. This is absurdity par excellence, if you will. You have everything that doesn't exist in the desert on this picture. It was totally forgotten, what the indigenous people, what made them survive for hundreds and hundreds of years. But here you've got electricity as much as you like and water as much as you like, everything that doesn't exist in the desert. The reason why St. Thomas had to die and Las Vegas could live, so one of them, St. Thomas was a rather big city in comparison to St. Thomas. The reason why St. Thomas had to die was because the federal government decided that electricity and water were needed, and the Hoover Dam, the largest dam project in America, was damming the Colorado River in the 1930s after the Great Depression. It was an enormous construction. This is one of the last photos. The last person who left St. Thomas was a car dealer, and probably the Ford Model T that you saw in the first photo that was St. Thomas was one of the ones that he sold and didn't have enough gas to go away. And here's something that's really striking. On the left map, you can see St. Thomas is underwater, and you see these maps. This is just the last 20 years of the water going down. This is why I'm calling my project on St. Thomas, The Ghosts Are Returning, because on the other maps from 2021 and 2022, I was there in 2012, you can see that St. Thomas is no longer under the water. So the ghosts of St. Thomas are returning to remind us of what we lost. And if you look at this picture that I also took 10 years ago of Hoover Dam, you can see what you could call a bathtub ring when you see how high the water used to be and it's going down. So Lake Mead, which is the lake that was formed, Colorado River formed a lake. Lake Mead looks like this. At Echo Bay, there used to be a lot of big yachts. And St. Thomas, this is St. Thomas when I visited it 10 years ago. Now you can actually walk through the town, so there is not just a cemetery. You can walk through the town, you can actually look at the street map, you can compare it. And the only two creatures, it was a bit scary. I was there, I think, in January or February. It was not that hot. The only two creatures that I could hear were two coyotes, but there was, of course, no humans. I'm intrigued, and in my book, Paradise Blues, I'm looking at a variety of very different places, the Mississippi River, the Arctic, the tropics, and I'm intrigued by what nature and what the environment does with certain places, what we do with certain places, what do we do with the desert, what do we do? We hide things that we don't want to see. And so after World War II, the Americans put their airplanes, the old airplanes, in the desert. These are boneyards. The other thing that people did, they didn't know what a nuclear bomb would do, and so this Big Shot bomb, it's called the Big Shot. They called it the Big Shot. It was and you can imagine what happened to the journalists and the military who were viewing it. It was a spectacle. In Las Vegas, you could go on a tour, on a nuclear viewing tour. The hotels made that part of their tourist. This was a fascinating part of that tourist thing. And of course, these people will have been haunted by the ghosts of what happened in the desert. So I'm really intrigued by what people do with the desert. Everything that you don't want to see anywhere else happens in the desert. It's like a basement, like a cellar. You need it, but you don't want to show it. And you don't want to have this construction in your living room. So unwelcome social groups. The Native Americans were put there in reservations. They were put next to nuclear storage areas. of course, the Mormons and other religious minorities, undesirable objects, toxic waste, discarded military airplanes, etc. Everything that is disagreeable, prostitution, gambling, you want it, but you don't want to see it. You have it in your basement. That's the desert. What is out of sight can still be ghost-like around. And I call it ontogenic. I think in French it sounds ontogenique, ontologie, sounds close to ontology. I think that's fascinating in a way. But I think there's something, Derrida wrote about it. The haunted world of the Colorado River looks like this in parts. So it's a dead river. It's no longer a river. It has lost its soul, if you will. It's no longer a river. But I'm trying to put some hope in this story. The interesting thing is that in Las Vegas, where there's no water and all the water has to be shipped there, people have restructured and have started what is called xeriscaping. You can see this here. So you actually get money if your front yard is no longer made up of grass, a lawn, green lawn, but there's native vegetation, cacti, any type of plant that will not need much water or stones. Same is true for all the public areas, in between the roads there used to be, or in the highways there used to be in Las Vegas, there used to be a lot of grass. They have replaced it all with either cacti or with stones. So I'm trying to think about, I think we can learn certainly from having little water, and in moving forward into the future, I think we need to remember the ghosts of people who were able to deal with this extreme situation. Water, power, beauty. This is about Niagara, one of the places that I visited. Niagara Falls looks like this, but close to it, and this is a view from the US-American side to the Canadian side. And close to it is this. It's actually part of Niagara Falls, and it's the biggest environmental disaster in American history. And there's no signpost to this. You cannot get there by car. You can only walk there. There are big barrels, and then I walked there. It was very difficult for me to find it because it's not signposted in any way. But the two of them are linked. And I think it should remind us of thinking of what we're doing when we think we have things, we think we have resources in abundance. Well, beauty was important. And the first architect, landscape architect in America, the Olmsted family, they designed, for instance, Central Park in New York, but also Yosemite. They designed Niagara Falls. And a painter and an architect, which in a way is fascinating, were able to create state parks, both on the American side, on the state, and on the Canadian side. And the idea originally in the 19th century was that you could get to as close as possible to the waterfalls, to paint them, or later on to take photos of them. So the only criterion was to have beautiful nature. But next to this beautiful nature, anything could happen. Because we were not thinking ecologically, we were not thinking environmentally, we were not thinking about what happens to nature when we do something to it, but we saw it more as a stage, as a theater, backdrop. In reality, these mills existed in the 19th century, and they were, Olmsted, the architect, said, they have to go. They have to be out of sight, but they were just moved a little bit further down and became much, much bigger. So again, the same story of moving things out of sight. This is what it looked like, the Olmsted Park with, natural stones and very rugged stones. And this is orchestrated nature. There's nothing real about it, but it's supposed to show us how beautiful nature can be. And then, of course, there's the fascination with the power and, again, like Las Vegas, this illumination of the water. In reality, on the left, you can see that there were three locomotives or engines that were transporting stones and rocks to build canals, the ones you can see on the right, for an electricity factory. So electricity was produced in abundance. The fact that you can light up Niagara Falls in pink today, and in all other colors they change, has to do with the electricity that was created here. And a city that is today not important, but it had 1 million inhabitants not so long ago, has less than 200,000, was Buffalo. It was the most illuminated city in the world at the time, during the Pan American Exposition in 1901, because of this mentality. I mean, we can do it, so why not illuminate it, the whole city at this exposition? Why not turn the night into the day all the time? Because there was so much energy, you can produce aluminum, you can have chemical industries. They need the most energy. There was so much water, endless energy. So the Hooker Company, did I skip one? I don't know. The Hooker Chemicals Company buried its chemicals here, 25,000 tons, in the unfinished Love Canal. They were building a lot of canals, as you could see before, and one of them was unfinished, the Love Canal. And here you can see that Love Canal became a community after Hooker left it. Hooker gave the land for free to Niagara Falls, to the town. Niagara Falls is just up the road from here on the left. And young families moved in. There was a school built, and they were really happy. It was cheap. There was labor. They had more than the average income. The houses were built very quickly. Almost everybody had children, had young families. And what people did not see in the beginning until the kids began to play and the ghosts of the past came up, the bad ghosts of the past, the toxics, was, you see, for instance, where it's white in the middle, that is already chemicals coming out of the ground, even though they were buried in barrels. Here is protests starting. And again, this is my story of hope, that amazingly, Lois Gibbs, a mother, many of the parents moved away, but Lois Gibbs was one of the people who said, I'm staying and I'm hooking up with politicians to demonstrate and to show the world what's happening here. And so here you can see her she's the one in dark hair, Jane Fonda to her left, and Tom Hayden, the activists. They succeeded in making this a national issue. So Jimmy Carter signed a law as a result. I mean, just imagine, this is a young woman who she didn't even have training, but she was shocked by what is happening to the kids of her neighbors, to her own kids, deformations, horrible diseases. She stood up and started environmental protest, which for me is a wonderful outcome and in a way a good ghost of the future, because the Superfund was started in 1980, where industry had to pay in to clean up toxic sites. There are many, many problems with all this. It's never, once you have a law like this, in the beginning there's a lot of money, but of course it's drying out. But I think we have to also tell these stories of hope. That we are so often frustrated these days because we see there's no way of stopping climate change. There's no way of stopping extinction, and we just resign. We become paralyzed. So I think it's important to see in every story also that there were people who didn't say we have to give in or just moved away. Disneyture, this is a complicated story. I hope I can tell you quickly. I was in Disney World, and I was the last visitor to Disney World before the pandemic. It was interesting. I was actually fingerprinted. I tried not to be fingerprinted. That's another story, an interesting story, because they didn't like that. They arrested me. Yeah, which, they're always smiling Disney people, but not in this case. The Everglades, my idea was, I go to Magic Kingdom, I go to Disney World, which is the most artificial place on Earth. It's a crazy fantasy place. And then I go to the Everglades, which is the first national park that is not spectacular. Grand Canyon and Yosemite, Mesa Verde, all these places are extremely spectacular. But the Everglades is just like this. There's nothing to be seen. It's just water and grass. And it became a national park. And I thought, this is the absolute opposite. Let's see what, is it really the case? Oops, go back, sorry. How do I go back? Can't go back. What was on the last picture? Okay, do I press longer? No. The red one? Okay. So here is, these are the Imagineers, engineers that imagine a different world. I think, for me, this is just a metaphor of what we're doing all the time. We imagine, we create worlds that are better than the real world. You go to India, you take a photo of a place, or to Africa, you take a photo of a place and you revive it by building it in Disney World. So the imaginative engineers have built these two places. I took these photos. I mean, it looks like real, and it's very easy, you know. You don't have to wait for the airplane. You don't have to check in a hotel. You stay 3 days in Disney World. You can go to Asia and Africa within 1 hour by train. And there's even Kiswahili spoken, and everything is made you believe that you are in the real world. So it's really not the real world. It's a hyper-real. This is what Disney World looked like in the beginning. It was totally changed. Imagine, this is the only place on Earth, by the way, where there are crocodiles and alligators. They are toxic, they are poisonous snakes. But Disney was doing a lot of things with this. I'm probably not allowed to show these pictures here. This is a photo that showed that there was a natural lake, the only natural lake, that they drained because they didn't like the color of the bottom. It was brown, it had to be blue, fairy tale blue. And they have 80 miles of canals. So what you see today, you see all these natural landscapes there, is all fake. This is what it looks like, Jungle Cruise. This is what it looked like when it was built. This is what the Jungle Cruise looks like once it's done. And this is the most recent incarnation of what Disney has done. Umberto Eco has called it the hyper-real. You cannot distinguish between what's real and what's not real. And I think we are moving into, for me, this is a metaphor also for ChatGPT. I think we have to deal with imagining what's happening with our world, and we have to go back to the real world. We need an understanding of where we're coming from, because if we don't have that understanding, if we don't know where we're coming from, the earth, the crust of the earth, the clay that we talked about, where can certain plants actually grow? If we get lost, if we get rid of the topsoil, we got rid of more than 50% of the topsoil of the earth within the last 150 years. More than 50%, plants can't grow without that. So I think we have to, I think it's super dangerous. And if you're in Disney World, you're told that Disney is ecological. This is the Everglades. So I thought, okay, this is true nature. However, if you check it out, you can see on the left, Disney World is in the very top where this little lake is. That's where Disney World is. And the water went all the way down hundreds of miles to the very south of Florida. There was enormous amounts of water in this grass of sea. Whereas on the right, you can see how water was distracted for purposes like orange plantations, mines. There are a lot of mines. There's phosphorus mines. There is also sugarcane, because when Castro became Cuban's head, the Americans didn't want sugarcane from Cuba anymore. So they needed to divert the water. And you can see this is all now plantation and urbanized place. The lakes look like this. They can be regulated like Disney World. Everglades only exists because of these constructions. The southern Florida looks like this. And here is a case in point. One of the oldest roads, the Tamiami Trail, needed to be deconstructed, needed to be taken out, and another road had to be built. You see that in the behind, because otherwise there would be no water left for the Everglades. Plus, much of the water that you see here is so poisoned that even in a place like Tampa, Florida, you have to take water out of the sea. There's no place in America where there's more water. So I was wondering, you know, how natural are the Everglades? They wouldn't exist unless we engineered the whole environment. So there's not such a big difference between Disney and the rest of not just Florida, but I think Florida is just extreme in a way. We think of two natures, but the two natures are really entangled. Here is my last example from my project on the Bavarian forest. I mean, this for me is a hopeful project in a way. I met the head of the first national park in Germany, very late, 1970. And he was hung in effigy at one point, and the people he worked with, and I realized my time is over. Okay, thanks. Can I do 5 minutes? So the idea was in the Bavarian forest, the Bavarian forest is at the German-Czech border, where the Iron Curtain was. The only reason why a national park could be started is because there was no infrastructure. People didn't like to live there. It was cold in the wintertime, and there was no industry to speak of. It was just they had glass making because of the trees, and then this type of tree, the spruce, was the one that gave you a lot of money. I mean, Germans in this area, you would have beech trees. 90% of the trees would be beech trees if you didn't do anything. So this is all managed forest, plantations, just to make money. And I think this is how we were thinking about trees for hundreds of years. Even those who started to think about sustainability, they thought about money. A tree is timber, and timber is money, or timber is shipbuilding, or timber is house building, etc. So the guy I interviewed, the head of the national park, started to say, we have to let nature be nature. That should be our agenda. Let nature be nature. But what happens if you let nature be nature in a national park where you have people living close by? It's different in Yellowstone where nobody lives, but in an area where close by are cultural, agriculturalists, where tourists go, and then a natural disaster happens. With climate change, you have more windfall, trees fall down, and spruce trees get hit by bark beetles. Bark beetles have eaten up all these trees. Scientists had no idea what was happening. Scientists said, okay, the bark beetle won't go beyond 800 meters above sea level, or 900, certainly not beyond 1,000, but he went at 1,100, 1,200, 1,300, 1,400. The bark beetle did not stop. The population was super angry. They were protesting against the national park. Anyways, they were speaking High German, not Bavarian. And so they were the enemies. They burnt down cabins in the national park. And the people who had, farmers were angry because the people who lived from the forest were angry. Tourist hotels were angry because the tourists would stay away. But interestingly, the opposite happened. And it means, it goes back to, we need time. The opposite happened. This area became extremely diverse. You have lynxes and wolves now, but you also have butterflies that you'd never seen, mushrooms that you'd never seen, new types of birds, and a biodiversity that is enormous. So by now, people actually, after decades, after these disasters, are saying, okay, we are selling the diversity and the story behind it. So for me, this is a story of a good ghost of the past. But it was tough in each of these cases. So this is what people would have liked to do with the bark beetles, use highly toxic insecticides, cut all the trees, but instead they left most of them. So this is what the good ghosts may look like. You have actually not only coniferous trees, but also these types of beech trees, oak trees, etc. in the front. And a diverse forest is actually the secret of where we should be going in the future. And finally, this is more of a metaphor. I really often have thought about, what is the antique figure, the figure in antiquity that is most like, that can tell us something about our time. For me, Prometheus is the figure. Prometheus stole fire from the gods, and that was really, really risky. It was not only risky, he had to suffer for it. And without fire, I mean, we know we wouldn't be living in this part of the world. We wouldn't be living in Siberia. So people could only migrate. We wouldn't be eating meat because without fire you couldn't eat animals. You may not want to eat meat, but so many things. Fire gave us comfort. And Prometheus took a risk of doing something good for the humans. But as a result, he had to suffer. And every night, an eagle came and ate his liver. And during the day, the liver was growing back every day. And in my opinion, this figure, Prometheus, is really the figure that is the epitome of what our world is like. We have taken extreme risks, and we become extremely vulnerable. Now, in antique mythology, there comes a god, uses his bow and arrow, and shoots the eagle. But we don't have an eagle, somebody who kills the eagle. We don't have somebody who can take away the problems that we have created ourselves. We don't have that person. We can't go to Mars. We know that geoengineering is not the solution. And so we need multiple ideas of moving forward to give us hope. And this is Prometheus. And this is what Prometheus 2.0 looks like, in my opinion. You can see we go for, we're actually destroying the Earth. Prometheus 2.0 is eating up the globe, is eating up our planet, has no heart. There's a dollar sign in the heart, and is polluting the world, and is really, and again, this goes to where we are moving at this point with technology, and is enormous, and we don't quite understand it. So for me, it is important to remember what we have done in this age of the Anthropocene. We've tried to create a world that makes life easy for us, but the outcome looks frightening. And so a couple of lessons, just a few lessons. As an environmental historian, what do I think is important? I think it's important to focus on nature as an actor as well. I mean, you saw that with the trees, but always think about nature, humans not being the only actor. The second lesson is a focus on what I call relationality and process. I haven't really thought this through. I mean, I haven't thought about ghosts enough, but I think it's really important to think more about relationality, to think that everything is in progress. Death is life in progress. A table is a tree. Think of this is actually originally also goes back to trees. This goes back to mine. Think of our world as something that is in process. And that relates to the papers that we've heard before about biochemistry and cycles. And environmental historians have to do that too. Not just focus on humans and their doings, not just on environmental protest and what we do to nature and what nature does to us, but also think in processes and cycles. My third point is we need to focus on real-world observation. In all my seminars with my doctoral students, we go out with foresters, we go to fish farms, we go into gorges with geologists, go out there and try to understand the world and write it into the world, but also when you do environmental history, I think it's super important that you go to the places and learn to read not just documents of nature, not just documents of culture, which every historian is good at reading, statistics, letters, documents, diplomatic, political documents, but also try to read nature. Try to understand that nature is moving and learn to read it. And finally, or is that my final point? No, I have a fourth point. In the age of ecological destruction, it makes sense to remember that ghost stories need to be frightening. They need to be frightening. Ghost stories are good because they are frightening, because we live in a time, if we pretend that there's nothing frightening out there, we are totally naive. But if we pretend that there is nothing we can learn from them, so if we pretend there are no bad ghosts, then we are naive. But if we pretend that there are no good ghosts, then we are cynical, and we should be neither of the two. So, thank you very much.
Merci. Thank you, Christof. What an amazing way of concluding the day in bringing up, first of all, thank you so much for actually engaging so much with the topic of the day, that is the ghost of the future. It's especially striking to hear you saying that they're in the world, but not of the world, as we're noticing with Salma preparing the project before. Shall we take one final question to close the day? Is there anyone who wants to ask, who's haunted by a question that becomes so pressing that he needs to bring it out? Then maybe what I would like to ask you is, because you talk a lot about the good ghost and the bad ghost, there is, I understand that it's connected to your notion of slow hope that you've argued elsewhere. That comes as something opposite to slow violence, this argument by Rob Nixon saying that the problem of the ecological mutation is that it's the global north mainly and the wealthiest are impacting mostly the global south or the most vulnerable communities through gradual and imperceptible ways, therefore not visible, but still haunting other places, something that is very ghostly in a way. And it's something that we were wondering about with preparing with Maria Finders, with Salma Moshari. The preparation is like, how do you sustain a hope when it's slow? Like, can hope work when it's not intense, when it's not, voilà, that's not a historical question, it's a very personal one, but I think that would be very interesting to hear your voice on that.
If it's a personal question, I have to say that I have a little bit less hope today than I had. But I don't want to say that. I didn't even notice that I used the term slow hope when I gave a talk 6 years ago. And I gave a talk about sustainability, and I used the term slow hope, and the next day people came and said, oh, you would talk about slow hope. It was so important. So I think that everybody realizes that that hope is needed. Slow violence is something that is creepy and creeping. I mean, things that are moving through the world that we don't see and are poisoning the environment. We produce, for instance, our batteries, our old cars go somewhere, we don't know where they go. They're out of sight, out of mind, and we create violence in other parts of the world where people get sick by dealing with these wrecks, for instance. And it's a slow, it's a very slow process, but I realized, for me, there was this one point. I was in Taiwan, and I met this architect who had totally recreated the campus of his university, had made it a biotope. There were campaniles, there were native species that had never been there before. He had torn down the wall. He had recreated the river that surrounded the campus, and it looked like a natural place. And his office was in a tree house, and I looked down on this. I said, "Do you have created something wonderful?" And he was saying, "Nothing. I've not done anything. I've been here for 40 years, and I've not." He wanted to change Taipei, and he didn't change Taipei. And that's where I realized that things don't happen overnight. I told him, you have had 40 years you did something that was outstanding. Your students, architects all over the world, are doing things like this as well. What gives me hope is that we don't believe in the arrow that shoots the eagle. But I believe that we are all responsible and should be infecting each other. We are all responsible for being the good ghosts. We are in the world. Only our thinking and our doing can realize the goodness. And so I see so many examples, and I started to collect in that little publication. Now you can read in 1 hour. It's actually for free. It's on the internet, Slow Hope. I collected maybe 10 examples of maybe 20. And I think we should all collect these examples and realize that things don't happen overnight. Our politicians have to act within a few years, but every example of somebody, even I could give you many examples, even the place where we now are with the Rachel Carson Center, we have a Landhaus. The guy who bought this land and turned it into an eco-farm was a butcher, had the biggest slaughterhouse, had 2 billion euros, sold a slaughterhouse and started an eco-farm. And if we collect these stories and realize, things can happen, change can happen. I see people, I look at the world, this is your question, I look at the world collecting these stories of hope, and I think we should all do it and then create our own stories and help doing it. We must realize that we can't do it alone, but many of us can make a difference.
Thank you so much, Christof. And it's really amazing to see that the most mundane or place, such as the example you just took of, let's say, someone who slaughters beef for cattle for a living, then turns it into a place, a research center. Environmental history is full of those